Last year was a massive year for free agent running backs. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, all these guys had phenomenal seasons. But what about this year for 2025? Well, in this video, we'll be breaking down the 10 best NFL free agent running backs for the upcoming season. And we're going to start things off with Aaron Jones, who he is now 30 years old, which is where you start to get a little bit concerned about running backs falling off in terms of efficiency, age, picking up some more injuries. But very quietly, Jones had one of the most solid and quietest 1,500-yard total seasons. This is his receiving yards and his rushing yards in 2024 with the Vikings. So despite him turning 30 this past season, he was able to play all 18 games for just the third time in his career. And he was still able to be efficient, averaging 5 yards per touch in a good Vikings offense behind a quality offensive line. These yards per touch factor in both his carries and his receptions. So it was a quality season for Jones, who now hits the free agency market yet again after signing a one-year deal last offseason with the Vikings. So what are some of the positives as he hits the market? He's a dual threat running back with lots of experience, and he remained healthy last year despite turning 30. In terms of landing spots, if we look at the cap spending for teams right now, you can see at the top is the Patriots. They have the most cap spending, and they don't really have a total need for running back. They could address it, but not one to get the top guy in the market or one of the top guys in Aaron Jones. But I look down here, the Vikings, the team that he's coming from, top 10 in cap spending. I think it's just simple to re-sign him. I think this is probably the best opportunity for Jones to go back to the same team where he put up 1,500 yards, remain healthy, a quality offense last year. You look at their backfield right now with Ty Chandler. We already know Jones is going to work well ahead of him like he did this past season. Even if they draft a rookie here, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to get Jones back on another 1 to 2 year deal. But if he wasn't to go there, I think the Raiders make a lot of sense. Now you can see right here, the Raiders number 2 in cap spending, ability to spend a lot of money is there for them. And you look at their backfield, if you remember last year, it was just all over the place. It was like a game of just which running back the flavor of the week in terms of who's going to get touches. Alexander Mattison, Amir Abdullah at times was involved. Sincere McCormick looked like their best running back. We know that to start the year it was Zamir White. He got hurt and was ineffective. It was just 4 different running backs, and none of them were ever popping off. So I think if Aaron Jones signs there, he would be the clear RB1. Now the next back we got to talk about is Najee Harris, who Najee Harris is still just 26 years old as I record this video. He'll be 27 very shortly, and by the time the season does kick off in 2025, and now he's coming off of a situation with the Steelers where he's been there the past 4 years on his rookie deal. He was a former first-round pick. They didn't pick up his 5th-year option, so now he's hitting the market. And you've probably already seen this stat because it was like brought up on a Sunday or Monday night football game, I believe, but he has actually had 1,000+ rushing yards in all 4 seasons so far this year. And I think it was Troy Aikman who famously said, like, I don't even care about that. And it makes sense. If you're barely topping 1,000 yards in 3 straight seasons playing every single game, it's not like you're averaging 100 yards per game. You're averaging like 60 yards per game. But it's still good. It shows his durability. He's never missed a game in 4 seasons and has gone over 1,000 yards in all those years. In fact, Najee Harris in his 4-year career is averaging 1,380 total yards per season and over 8 touchdowns per season. Now in 2024 specifically, he was averaging over 17 touches a game. Again, did not miss a single game, and he was actually pretty explosive. He ranked top 10 in evaded runs. He was top 20 in explosive run rate, which was something that fell off back in 2023. He wasn't explosive at all. We actually saw it at the start, and throughout 2024, he was a little bit more explosive. And he started the season fantastic before picking up a bunch of bumps and bruises, played through them though. He had 70 or more total yards in 8 straight games with the Steelers to start 2024, so he's still been effective. Now this will be Najee Harris's first time on the open market coming off of his rookie deal, so what are the positives for him as he looks for a new team? First off is his durability. He's never missed a game. Secondly, he can not only run between the tackles, but catch passes. He averages 45 catches a year. Now the one concern for Najee and really all the running backs in this video that we have to bring up is that the NFL draft is upcoming, and this is arguably the most loaded running back class in the past decade. Like, depending on where you look, some people will say it's better than the last 2 running back classes combined, and that's saying something when you look at the talent that came out of those classes. But free agency does come first, so addressing the position is the priority in free agency before the draft, and I think, again, the Raiders are a team because of these 4 running backs. None of them popped off, even Dylan Laube, a late-round rookie for them last year. I think that this could be a nice spot for Najee Harris to actually be a workhorse running back. If it's not with the Raiders, we can go over to the Denver Broncos. We look at this team. Javonte Williams is a free agent right now. McLaughlin's only been an undersized satellite back. They did draft Audric Estime last year. He had some fumbling issues. He just had issues in general. He cannot stay on the field, and he was not all that productive with the opportunities he was given, but there might be a bigger role for Audric Estime. Maybe, though, they just sign Najee Harris relatively cheap, and they just roll with him. The under landing spot for a Najee Harris would be if Aaron Jones did indeed leave the Minnesota Vikings. I think that they would want a veteran presence in there, especially for pass protection with J.J. McCarthy, who is likely to be starting at some point, if not the entire year next year. I think Najee Harris makes some sense there. Now, this next veteran running back is very interesting because I actually think he has a much better market than people are anticipating. And that guy's name is Nick Chubb. Yes, Nick Chubb, who, if we scroll to his age here on Player Profiler, yeah, sure, he's 29 years old. He'll be 29 and a half by the time the season starts. This is a guy coming off of yet another injury. He ended the season with a foot fracture, as you can see right here. He's going to be fine, at least as of right now. Most of the time, you just recover from these bones in a couple of months, if not weeks, so he should be good to go by the 2025 season. But keep in mind, this is not just a foot fracture that he's coming off of. He had a serious serious knee injury a year before. And that knee injury was he dislocated his knee, which resulted in him tearing his MCL, his LCL, his PCL, everything possible. And this was an injury that people said he might not return for 1.5 to 2 years. Well, he came back as soon as and quick as last year. Now, he didn't do much when he came back. He played in 8 games. He only ended up going out there and averaging a career low, if you can see right here, 3.3 yards per carry. But there's a lot of things that factor into this. He was on a terrible offense, bad quarterback play for most of the season, injured offensive line. What else? He was coming back from a terrible knee injury. Let's give the guy some breaks. But just the mere fact that he was able to return from this injury that quickly just shows his determination, his motivation to actually get on the field and play football, which I do think will go a long way with a lot of general managers when they're thinking about signing him to a relatively cheap deal. There is something to be said about that veteran leadership when you're talking about locker room presences. That is also part of the package, the off-field as well as the on-field package that you get with a player. So let's look at some of the teams. I think the one team that stands out here that's actually top 5 in cap space available right now is the Chargers. They're 5th overall in cap spending. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to go out and get one Nick Chubb. This assumes that they don't bring back J.K. Dobbins, who is also a free agent. But after this, like, who else are you looking at on this team? Gus Edwards is not somebody I think is going to be there long term. Kamani Vidal was a rookie who saw some playing time this past year, but was very raw in general, and Jim Harbaugh is not going to give this rookie the entire workload, at least not to start the year. I think if you go out there and get a Nick Chubb, put him on a win-now team that has a good offensive line, 3 first-round picks as of now on that Chargers offensive line, with Jim Harbaugh, run-first offense, that could be interesting. There's also the Steelers. If they were to move on from Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren is a restricted free agent, which means he's highly likely to be back with the Steelers, so this can just kind of be Nick Chubb, fits that physical mentality of the AFC North and Pittsburgh football in general. He can just one-for-one replace Najee Harris for probably a cheaper price point. All right, now a guy that we talked about when we were just showing the Chargers as a potential fit for Nick Chubb was J.K. Dobbins. Because as I briefly mentioned, he's also a free agent, and he's one of the younger free agents that you're going to find. He's still just 26 years old. He'll be 26 years old when the next season starts, and he's coming off of a season where he basically bet on himself. He was coming off of an Achilles injury. He's had a serious knee injury in the past. This past year, he signed a 1-year deal worth just $1.6 million with the Chargers. That is well below like backup RB money in the NFL. But here's the crazy thing. He only guaranteed $50,000 at signing. Let me just put this in perspective. The lowest contracts normally for guaranteed money are somewhere around like $500K for guys that you've never heard of. He took a $50,000 guaranteed salary. That's how much he bet on himself. And it paid off in a pretty significant way. He had a career high year with the Chargers, revived his career, and now he has a nice market entering this free agency period. You can see right here, he had over 1,000 total scrimmage yards. This was while missing 4 games with some knee soreness last year, or knee injury. And he was an effective player. His explosive rating of explosive plays of 10 plus yards, he ranked top 10 in the NFL. He started the year off hot with massive games against the Raiders. And now if you're thinking about some of the positives, as Dobbins is once again now in the free agency market, it looks a lot better than it did last year when he was a free agent. He's just 26 years old. He's coming off of a strong year, and he should regain more explosiveness another year removed from his Achilles injury. Now, in terms of his landing spots, I do think like the most obvious thing would be for the Chargers to just re-sign him, but it depends on what his cost will be. If his cost has now gone up after a good year and not the most flashy running back free agent market compared to last year, well, I think that Dobbins just might be too expensive and they can get, like we said, a Nick Chubb for cheaper. If Dobbins was to leave and Aaron Jones was also to leave the Vikings, I think he's a nice cheaper option to go and put in compared to Aaron Jones, the Minnesota Vikings offense. He's somebody who can not only run between the tackles, catch passes, showed his explosiveness last year. I think that's appealing for what the Vikings want to be on offense. And lastly, I do believe that the Denver Broncos are also an appealing offense with a young quarterback back there. They're building their offense. They'll probably attack the wide receiver, tight end position in free agency in the draft as well. And I also think they'll need to for the running back spot. This could be a nice spot to do so with J.K. Dobbins. Now, this next running back is a top 5 free agent running back in my opinion, maybe even higher than that. Let's talk about it. And that's Rico Dotto, who this time last year, like he got like a 1-year re-signing deal with the Cowboys, and people were like, is he going to be their starter? No, they'll sign somebody else in free agency. They'll get somebody in the NFL draft. Well, spoiler alert, they didn't, which allowed Rico Dotto to come out here and put on a career year. He had a career high 274 touches. His total yards, as you can see right here on StatMuse, between his rushing and receiving, over 1,300 total yards, was averaging basically 5 yards per touch, was breaking tackles at a nice rate too, a top 20 rate in broken tackles. Explosive run rate was above average as well in terms of 10 plus yard gains. This was all fantastic. And he really started to come on towards the end of the season. This is what he averaged over his final 6 games of the year. 106 total yards per game and 22.2 touches per game. So obviously he showed he could be effective despite not even being in a quality offense. Like the Cowboys towards the end of the year didn't have Dak Prescott. Teams were stacking the box against Rico and he was still finding success. So what are some of the positives for Rico Dotto now that he is a free agent? There's not a lot of tread on his tires. He's just 26 years old, and last year he proved he could handle a big workload and remain efficient. And this guy can also catch passes. He caught 39 balls last year and was top 15 or so in every single running back receiving metric. Now, in terms of his landing spots, just based on their roster right now, you would think, oh, the Cowboys will bring him back. They have literally nobody else there. They cut Ezekiel Elliott towards the end of the 2024 season. But then you come in here and you look at the cap spending. The Cowboys are in the bottom 10 in the league league in available cap space right now. They basically are under right now. They're over the cap, I should say, by $3 million. Of course, this can change just by restructuring some contracts, letting some players go, things like that. But the running back position is probably not going to be a priority, especially when you have a loaded running back class in the NFL draft, and they're going to be having a top 15 pick. So I think that Rico Dowdle is going to hit the free agency market, and I think a really nice spot for him would be to go to the Cleveland Browns, assuming they don't re-sign Nick Chubb. What you're going to have there is Deontay Foreman is also a free agent, so Jerome Ford is going to be there. I think this would be a nice spot for Rico Dowdle to go in. That gives him the potential to be the RB1, at the very worst, a split backfield with Jerome Ford in Cleveland. Other options for where he would fit would be the Raiders. They have a lot of money to spend, and he might actually get a decent contract of like $7 million a year, or the Denver Broncos. Now, before we get into this next running back, who's actually the youngest player in this video, I have to let you know about a great offer. And that would be from PrizePicks, the sponsor of today's video. And very simply here, as you can see it on the screen, if you play just $5 on PrizePicks, they'll give you $50 instantly for free. Now, what is PrizePicks? Simply put, you just take the more or less on player statistics. So as you can see right here on an example for today's games in the NBA, this will be different, but you can do any sport that you want that's currently available, as well as already next year's NFL season totals. You can see here, Steph Curry, you think he's going to go for more than or less than 27 points, more than or less than 30 points for Anthony Edwards in the NBA, right? You can pick any sport that you want. Specifically, they have a bunch of esports. They have every sport you can think of. It's as simple as that. You pair some plays together and you go on with your day. And as I mentioned earlier, when you join, they'll give you a free $50 to play with. All you have to do is scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below and use the code SAL23 and you'll get a free $50 to play with right away. I've been using PrizePicks for 4 to 5 years, even before I started partnering with them. I love the product so much, so be sure to go and take advantage of that offer that they're doing. Thanks to PrizePicks for sponsoring the video. Now, that running back I was talking about, who's the youngest in this video, is Javonte Williams. Yes, Javonte Williams is already a free agent, despite being just 24 years old. He came into the NFL out of North Carolina, UNC, at a very young age, and now he's already hitting the market at 24 years old. Now, the problem with Javonte Williams is that after a nice start to his career way back with Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos as a rookie, since then it's fallen off because he had a massive injury. In 2022, he had this injury where he tore his ACL, LCL, PCL, every single part of his knee. This is usually like a 1.5 year recovery to get your full burst back. So that's why his season in 2023, 2 years ago, wasn't good, and it still continued this past season. Because as you can see right here, these past 2 years, this is 2024, just 3.7 yards per carry. The year before that, coming off of his injury, just 3.6 yards per carry, as opposed to being over 4 yards per carry the first 2 years in his NFL, also being much more efficient as a pass catcher. That's fallen off a cliff the last 2 seasons. This past year, he only averaged 8 carries per game with the Broncos, and it seemed like every single week they were trying to find anybody else to give them pulse. Jaleel McLaughlin got touches. Audric Esme was getting work, but he continued to fumble. I think Mike Boone even got involved at one point in this offense. Blake Watson was on the roster as well, getting touches with the first team in practice at times. They were trying to give anybody the ball but Javonte Williams, which very much leads me to believe that they will not be bringing him back in free agency. It seems like they didn't even want him on the team heading into last year. There was rumors that he might be cut before the season, and now I don't think he's ever going to be on the Broncos again. So in terms of some of the spots where he fits, like, yeah, the Raiders are going to be a talking point for all these teams because of how much money and their need at so many different positions, but I think the Bears are an interesting option to touch on here. Number 6 on this list in cap spending. If we look at the Bears right now, they have DeAndre Swift. They have a new coach in Ben Johnson, who coached DeAndre Swift at the Lions. Didn't seem like he liked him overall, but Swift would maybe be that cheaper discount version of a Jahmyr Gibbs. And if one Javonte Williams was to join this team, if they're still trying to do a 2 running back committee like they did with the Lions, that's Ben Johnson, the new offensive coordinator with the Bears. Well, if he still wants to utilize 2 running backs, the David Montgomery of that scenario would maybe be a Javonte Williams. Another option would be the Pittsburgh Steelers to pair up with Jaylen Warren, which you would get would be a younger running back than Najee Harris, a younger running back. I don't even want to say more durable because that's obviously not been the case the past 4 years, but at least a younger running back and probably cheaper running back would be the replacement for Najee Harris if you got a Javonte Williams. And then maybe a wild card would be the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, Pacheco's going to come back another year removed from his injury. He should be better, but we'll see if they re-sign Kareem Hunt. If not, adding Javonte back there is interesting. He can catch passes. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is actually Ty Johnson, 27-year-old Ty Johnson. He's been on the Bills the last couple of years. He's now a free agent, and I think he's a pretty sneaky free agent. Like, I think he can actually contribute to an NFL team. I don't think he's going to get re-signed because the Bills have James Cook, and Ray Davis showed in flashes this year that he could be really productive. So I think Ty Johnson will probably have the market and opportunity to be an RB2 somewhere else. And this is a pretty solid player. I mean, he has nice speed, 90th percentile speed according to Player Profiler. You go over to his size right here, still relatively young at 27. You go over to his size, 210 pounds, so he has a nice size to be not only in between the 20s back, but also a red zone back. And in 2024, he was great. He averaged an insane 7.5 yards per touch on his 83 touches in Buffalo. And out of all the running backs in the NFL, he ranked 4th in the NFL, averaging 4.9 yards per carry. So I think he'll be a strong option anywhere that he lands as a potential RB2, maybe like a sneaky fantasy stash depending on the running back he's behind. Next up, our running back 8, I think at this point that we're going to talk about is Kareem Hunt. He went from being on the couch to start the season last year to then ripping off 8 straight games as the clear RB1 for the Chiefs. He ended up making his debut with the Chiefs in week 4, and from this point forward, the next 8 games without Isaiah Pacheco, he averaged 21.5 carries per game. And he was also leaned on in the postseason for the Kansas City Chiefs, but as you can see right here, it's not like he was efficient. He's an older running back at this point. You can see he only averaged 3.7 yards per touch, 49th in the NFL. You talk about his broken tackle rate, 45th in the NFL. Like, he wasn't doing anything crazy there. He wasn't ripping off explosive runs. He was getting you 2 to 6 yards per carry. And now that he's 30 years old, I really don't see any team, especially with a loaded running back class and all the other free agents we've mentioned in this video, I don't see a team making him a priority. Maybe he's one of those guys who just kind of sits and waits like he did this past year until the season starts or the preseason starts to join a roster. The next running back we should talk about is Jaylen Warren, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, he's a restricted free agent, which makes it very likely that he's going to return to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'd expect him to split the backfield in Pittsburgh with like a Nick Chubb like we mentioned earlier, or an incoming rookie. And similar things can be said for Jordan Mason. He's a restricted free agent with the 49ers. He'll be backing up Christian McCaffrey this next year, which honestly might lead to a larger workload after we just saw how injured McCaffrey was this past year. Maybe it leads to a lighter workload next year for McCaffrey, who continues to age. In terms of Mason's competition with the 49ers, like Elijah Mitchell is now a free agent as well. The only other guy there is going to be Isaac Horrendo, who showed that he's a quality player as well. So this will be a legitimate threat in terms of the RB2 positioning. Maybe Horrendo's presence actually leads to Mason not returning, but these restricted free agents usually return to the team. So these have been the 10 best NFL free agent running backs for 2025. It's nowhere near as good as last year, but there are still some quality names in here that are going to make an impact in the NFL for your fantasy teams and whatnot entering the next season. If you enjoyed this video, I have the wide receiver version of this video right here, and there'll be more content coming out over the next days and weeks for free agency and the NFL draft. So I appreciate you all tuning in. Hit the subscribe button before you go, and I'll see you in the next one.